Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking an updated look at Falling Frontier, an upcoming sci-fi strategy game that I've been looking forward to for quite some time now that just keeps getting better and better. I had two very long chats with the developer to get some exclusive insights on how things have been progressing and how things have evolved over the last year or so, and I've even had the opportunity to test the game for myself, which has provided some additional insight into its workings too. If you like the look of Falling Frontier, make sure you add it to your wishlist, as that's a great way to support independent developers especially, and it's a great way to stay up to date with the game's development as well. If you enjoy this video and want more Falling Frontier updates, let me know by hitting the like button down below, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and I'll answer all that I can. With all that said, please keep in mind that this is all pre-alpha footage, and some of the systems we'll be discussing are of course subject to change over the course of development. Now, with timestamps down below, let's begin. Combat Overhaul. First off, let's talk about the Combat Overhaul. The latest trailer that came out about a month ago showcased some of it in action, but quite a bit has changed since then, and there's a lot going on under the hood in that trailer that I think is well worth highlighting. The strategic and tactical implications are really exciting, with things intentionally heading in the direction of more sim tactical elements, but not overbearingly so. Apart from that, I've got a lot of new information about some of the armaments, how they work, and what sets them apart. First off, just visually, you'll see a complete UI overhaul, so let's use that to help organize this conversation a little. Part of the UI overhaul is for purely aesthetic reasons, but that aside, there are some new gameplay implications as well. If you haven't seen my prior videos on Falling Frontier, I highly recommend watching the ones I've linked in the pinned comment and description down below for a look at the bigger picture in more detail, but I'll explain context as we go along here so you're not left in the dark. When a ship is selected, the left panel shows its name, which you can change and which will show up on the ship's hull, and just below that, you get its class, the multitude of which we'll discuss in more depth in just a few moments. Further down, we've got the ship's hull, which is its HP, and then we've got its crew count, fuel reserve, food stockpile, and munition supply. These have always been key considerations in Falling Frontier, meaning a flotilla that's going out to engage in combat needs to be kept topped up in a few different ways. Supply ships and fuel ships can be vulnerable to enemy attacks and might make a flotilla easier for enemy scanners to spot, simply because of the larger signature size, but they can be essential when engaging distant enemy stations and ships. In a worst-case scenario, your ships can return to a station of your own to top up, but with physicalized resources, you'll need to make sure your forward operating bases are kept topped up themselves so that ships aren't retreating to get fuel, food, and munitions from a place that doesn't have any to offer. Having to consider these resources means you can't simply camp out in the void of space, slowly running out of food, nor can you put up an endless chase in case you run out of fuel, slowing your ships down to a crawl as they run on fumes. And engagements need to be carefully monitored, since a warship without munitions isn't able to fire its turrets, its missiles, or even its personal defense weapons, meaning it isn't much of a warship. Every shot consumes munitions to varying degrees, so there's a bit of a balancing act when kitting out your ships. That aside, it's good to keep in mind that repairs out in the void of space are limited at best, but we'll discuss that in more detail later. Let's stay focused on the UI for now. Further down, you can see the key personnel and officers aboard the ship, key individuals that you can specifically recruit and assign between ships based on their traits and unique skills that'll impact how well the ship performs certain tasks. They are a very important resource, which is why keeping them alive and safe is crucial. I've mentioned in previous videos that a ship that has been customized to include escape pods will allow its crew to relatively safely get out in the case of critical damage. These pods work a little different now, forever drifting in space after the impulse of the initial ejection sets their course. While you can still come around with a rescue ship to save their souls or pick them up for interrogation if they belong to the enemy, the longer you wait means the further apart they might spread, making it harder to find and pick them up. An investment in time that'll be worthwhile for your most capable commanders, surely, but it really applies some pressure in a way that the game didn't before. Having a ship selected will also reveal some special orders you can give it, including the option to flip on silent running. This allows ships to turn off a variety of systems, making them harder to spot through passive means, though active radar will still be able to ping you, albeit from a much shorter range. Just like having a bunch of ships together presents a bigger energy signature for enemy recon to pick up, so too does having a bunch of silent running ships packed closely together. This will be a great way to sneak past enemy patrols or pull back to safety, but you'll need to be careful since silent running, at least in its current iteration, will close heat sinks and start to overheat your ship, causing damage if temps get too high. You'll of course be given the choice to take on that risk and suffer the consequences, just like with everything else in Falling Frontier, but that just means it's another thing to think about. Silent running also disables the ship's jump drive, and you won't be able to jump immediately after flipping silent running off either, as the jump drive takes some time to spool up. Now, jumping is a fairly familiar element in these kinds of games, but there is a very unique aspect to it in Falling Frontier. Should you jump your ships into a region of space occupied by enemy ships that you weren't previously aware of due to scouting, there's a chance that your own ship's crews will be startled or otherwise impacted in some way that makes them a little slower to respond for a short period of time. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this mechanic is still early in the design process, so it might work out a little differently in the end, but I love how it encourages players to actually engage with scouting and recon mechanics to balance out these kinds of risks in a way I haven't seen before. Further down in this panel, you'll see some active abilities that the ship has based entirely on how you've customized it. In the case of this gameplay footage, both ships have vertical launch systems that can be used to fire various kinds of missiles at either a single or multiple targets. With limited ammunition consuming the ship's munitions with every shot, these systems will typically have a minimum and maximum range within which they can operate. But there's a ship module you can get on other ships that will help extend their range by painting targets. A capable admiral can use the two types of modules in tandem between two ships to strike with more powerful missiles from a significantly greater range than otherwise expected. This kind of synergy is reflective of a lot of real-world military technology and tactics, and it once again encourages players to do more than just put the biggest guns on their biggest ships. There are other interesting active abilities already in the works too, though any one ship can only have two at any given time. We actually saw another active ability in this previous trailer, a good old-fashioned turn and burn, a quick way to flip your ship around and move in a completely different direction. Not only does this have advantages in terms of mobility, but it also allows the ships to fire on targets that may otherwise be hiding in its blind spot. Selecting a specific weapon on a ship will now highlight its firing arc and where it's currently looking. Turret rotation speeds are actually a factor in this game, so that's something you'll want to keep in mind when customizing your ships, but that aside, you also want to be wary of potential blind spots determined by the ship's design and the hardpoint you're using to fire from. Different ships have different layouts that result in different blind spots for different classes of guns, so you'll want to make conscious decisions across all these factors at all times, and what's more, ships roll as they move around. This means that there's another added layer of consideration as you give your movement orders. The roll of a ship can absolutely determine if it can acquire a target or not, so in your haste to respond to enemy movements, you want to pace yourself using the speed commands available when giving movement waypoints. That aside, each weapon is able to target independently, and at times you want to go in and individually choose targets for each individual weapon while also considering how these ships move. And since combat engagements are typically between a small number of ships on either side, none of this gets overwhelming, which is an excellent bit of foresight from the developer. Naturally, on the topic of blind spots, getting into enemy blind spots is a viable tactic, and using a flimsier but more nimble ship will allow you to do exactly that. This can be especially effective if you manage to sneak a missile boat into an enemy ship's PDC blind spot, firing away without enemy point defense able to respond as efficiently as usual. You can also hide behind cover, so to speak, getting asteroids or even the corpses of other ships between yourself and the enemy to provide some degree of protection. With some clever maneuvering, you can also bait the enemy to potentially fire on its own ships. In fact, new collision and penetration mechanics alongside new damage models have been made that are going to make positioning all the more important. In-depth damage models. Every round fired has a lot of math going on around it determined by its type and caliber, and what it hits. When the hull of a ship gets hit, a calculation is made that determines how deep into the ship the round will actually go. This is based on the hull's ability to withstand penetration, and if the round goes all the way through the ship and out the other side, you can expect additional damage to be done on its way out. Exit wounds have an actual impact here. What's more, if a round goes through, it'll continue to punch through subsequent ships en route, losing momentum and damage output over time. This means you'll really have to think about how your ships are lined up and how you might be able to punch through enemy ships to maximize the damage done by every shot. This is obviously not an overbearing aspect of combat, but a fun aspect to engage with if it's your speed. There are quite a few interesting things that happen when a ship gets hit though, and while some elements might feel familiar in the genre, Falling Frontier is once again applying its own flavor in many ways. First of all, it's important to note that not every shot from the same weapon does the exact same amount of damage. There will be slight variances here and there. This is to reflect a multitude of factors that can impact how much damage is actually done, from where exactly on the ship the hit landed to the relative velocity at the point of impact, so on and so forth. Apart from that, the way targeting works is also of particular importance. While you're able to tell individual weapons on your ship which enemy ship to target, said targeting aims for the entire enemy ship. This means that some rounds might sway left, some might sway right, and any shots that don't miss will hit a variety of spots along the target ship's hull. Not only have collision detection models been significantly upgraded, but where exactly the hit lands can actually make a significant difference. Should a round penetrate the ship's hull, it'll go on to hit the components tucked away inside. Again, based on how you customize your ships, these components can be anything from the ship's VLS, to its food stores, its munitions compartment, fuel stores, reactor, escape pods, on and on, all visualized in the UI so you can see what has taken damage and what has been destroyed. Damage to different components has different impacts, of course. By and large, it reduces the efficiency of said component, but what that translates to differs from component to component. A turret that turns more slowly or eventually gets stuck in one position, for example, or perhaps a sudden reduction in crew count reducing the overall capabilities of your ship. Maybe an immediate slowdown in the ship's movement speed when its reactor gets hit, the inability to jump, which can spell doom if the jump drive gets destroyed, and if your munition stores take a serious hit, instant destruction. What I love here is that you're not just worried about a ship's hull. It'll take time to actually destroy one of your larger ships, but if enough of its components have been taken offline, it's basically been neutralized. When a component is completely destroyed, further hits to the same component will simply bleed damage to adjacent components instead. Within reason, of course. The idea here is that interconnected modules will suffer collateral damage, and from a gameplay perspective, it keeps the stakes high. It also encourages you, as the player, to plan your positioning accordingly, either to protect damaged modules on your own ships, or to focus on damaged modules on enemy ships. As mentioned before, repairs out in the void of space are only so efficient, and this goes for components too. Crossing certain thresholds of damage will mean said components or the hull can only be repaired up to said threshold, operating at best at reduced efficiency, further and further reduced based on how much damage was done. The maximum repair limit is also determined by how much crew you have on board the ship versus its maximum count, and various modules you may have customized the ship with. Barring the ship's own capabilities, you'll be able to use repair ships and repair crews to help things along. They might be able to do better than what a ship can do for itself, but for a full repair job all the way up to 100%, you'll have to bring the ship back to port. As with munitions and food and fuel, you can use your logistical powerhouse to keep ships out there for longer, but at times, you'll have to make your way back to base to top up. The new damage models are really quite impressive, not just in how they impact gameplay in both tactical and strategic layers, but also in how they're visualized. So, let's take a moment to discuss the upgraded aesthetic. Though Falling Frontier still only has one man coding it, which continues to blow my mind, he's had the help of an excellent composer producing all the music since I first covered the game on my channel, and for the last little while now, the team has welcomed aboard a new artist that has helped unify the game's aesthetic as far as all the ship designs are concerned, aiming to make them much more realistic in terms of scale, form factor, and functionality, with much more to come in the future with regards to creating a cohesive and believable visual style. The expansion of the art department has really opened up a lot of options here, and we're seeing them on display already. For one, different factions in the game will have distinct looks to their ships and components where appropriate. Think of it like the military-industrial complexes of our real world, where there are multiple manufacturers which each tend to have somewhat distinct styles, but at times, the same manufacturer sells to multiple countries, with countries sometimes mixing and matching modules as needed. This adds a bit of character to the game, just giving a bit of visual life that ties nicely in with the lore. Beyond different stylings for the modules, some ships will have significant structural differences too, furthering the idea of multiple manufacturers, each with their own distinct styles and approaches, even for similar classes of ships. On the topic of adding character to the game, Fallen Frontier ships are very much characters in their own way, since they're able to take a beating, returning to stations for repairs before venturing out into the fray again. You'll actually keep ships around for quite a bit of time unless you end up being careless or get outplayed by the AI. They're expensive and time-consuming to build, so in a game where a handful of ships can turn the tide of a war, you'll want to stay on the ball in keeping said ships alive. To take advantage of that survivability of ships in a way that gives them more personality, Fallen Frontier actually keeps a track of the kind of damage a ship has taken from each shot and where, leaving appropriate battle scars for all to see. That aside, when repairs are done to bigger sections of the ship, you'll often see the patchwork of repairs that are keeping it together, just further differentiating a historied ship from a young one. It might not have a direct impact on gameplay, but it sure makes the world feel alive in a way that I haven't seen other strategy games do, at least as far as memory serves, and I think it's just a lovely little touch. All this on top of being able to see your ship's custom names on the ship itself is just another display of the level of detail here. Beyond that, there's been a massive change to how the camera works. Previously locked to levels of zoom, the camera now gives the player freedom to go as far in or out as possible within reason. This introduced some challenges with regards to how data is displayed, but the new UI is looking absolutely beautiful as it stacks or culls information at the different levels of zoom. It's also just really cool to be reminded of the planned scale of the game in doing so, and it still blows my mind that everything from the placement of planets and asteroids to the customization of volumetric fog and the effects within will be accessible in the editor for people to build their own stories with. On the topic of telling your own stories though, let's discuss ship customization. The degree to which you can customize your ships in Fallen Frontier continues to escalate. While I'm not able to show the customization UI since it's undergoing a massive overhaul right now, I am able to share some details as to how it all works and the kinds of decisions you'll be making. For starters, there will be a multitude of ship classes that each specialize in various ways, and while some will be built for battle, others might be built for resource extraction or construction, with customization allowing you to improve efficiency across the various fields. You're not just customizing your battleships here, you're also customizing your mining ships, your construction ships, so on and so forth. Now, not only will you be able to swap between the different classes and bodies of ships, going in to customize which modules you're equipping, like missile launchers and escape pods and hangar bays and on, but you can actually go in and change each hardpoint out too. Each turret comes in two parts, the body and the barrel. There are multiple classes of turrets that vary in size, with escalating damage output the bigger you go, with reduced rotation speeds to balance that out. A ship may be able to host a Class 4 turret, but you might opt to go with a Class 3 instead because you want faster target acquisition, for example. You're balancing DPS against armor penetration values and range, picking your turret body and barrel accordingly, and what's more, the turret bodies are each designed specifically for individual ships so that it's visually cohesive and sensible too, not sticking out like a sore thumb regardless of how you've mixed and matched your options. Mechanically speaking, this is the kind of ship customization that asks you to really consider what your enemy is fielding, encouraging you to respond in an attempt to stay one step ahead. But I digress. Not only can you launch solid projectiles from the barrels of these turrets, but you can swap them out for two kinds of missile turrets too, each with subtypes to pick from. Unguided missiles are one option, relatively simple to understand, but tracked missiles can either be more or less capable of confusing enemy countermeasures as they home in, with the likelihood of success there determined entirely by the kind of countermeasure the enemy is using. So yes, you can customize countermeasures too. Standard countermeasures use munitions and have a low chance of success, while drive signature countermeasures are a different kind of defensive module that unlock an active skill. Its use is tied to munitions too, but it has a significantly higher success rate, though you do need to actually activate it and worry about cooldown timers. Ships can also be equipped with CWIS point defense weapon systems to shoot down incoming enemy missiles, working separately from countermeasures that are used to distract incoming missiles instead. It's like turrets firing at a missile and blowing it up versus chaff being fired to distract a missile and sort of guide it elsewhere, protecting the ship's hull. Either way, as we discussed previously, the placement of all these turrets, point defense systems, and modules are extremely important, since firing arcs are a serious consideration at all times, as the ship can't just shoot through itself to fire at the enemy or incoming missiles. Picking and choosing what goes where is crucial and partly determined by the base design of the ships themselves. Of the many classes to come, we discussed 3 in quite a bit of detail: a support class, a scout forward observer class, and a picket ship. The Hano is a support class ship we discussed, with different faction-specific variants featuring different textures and overall build aesthetics to help tell them apart, despite some of their functional similarities. The Hano is able to use the turn and burn active ability with its upgraded thrusters, allowing you to pull off this glorious maneuver from the trailer, and it also comes with drive signature countermeasures as described just moments ago. In customizing it, you'll be managing a total of 5 turrets, split between Class 3 medium size and large Class 4 turrets, and you'll also be able to install both a forward and rear vertical launch system if you want access to missiles as an active ability. The rear VLS can be swapped out for hangars with drones of various kinds, and apart from that, the Hano has access to multiple different kinds of point defense weapon systems for its 4 CWIS slots as well. The second class we discussed, but I unfortunately can't show today, is the Forward Observer. It's a very versatile class, and you'll have the ability to swap components out for laying mines, dropping depth charges, or search and rescue. But it's also where you can install a targeting module that helps allied ships fire further than their own ranges would typically allow. The large forward sensor allows it to spot targets early, and with the targeting module installed, your flotilla can start firing away from what would typically be outside their range. This kind of synergy between unit types is what I absolutely love to see in my strategy games. It can also have the upgraded drive signature countermeasures like the Hano. It has access to forward VLS as well as 2 Class 3 turrets and 2 CWIS located up front, resulting in a bit of a blind spot behind it. The third class we discussed still has a placeholder name, and I also can't show it, but it's supposed to be a picket ship. It's a heavily armored frigate inspired by escorts in real-world navies, and it'll feature 4 Class 3 turrets, 2 up front and 2 behind, with 6 Class 2 personal defense weapon systems with a small blind spot at the back. It comes with a single massive thruster that allows it to go faster than any of the previous ships that we've discussed, but it lacks VLS, with no option to add search and rescue or hangar bay modules either. This thing is supposed to be fast, nimble, and punchy, featuring ablative armor that allows it to take a bit of a beating. There are some cool internal customization options here to make up for the fact that there are fewer external modules to customize, but I don't have too many details on that front yet, though I am sure they'll come soon, and you can bet I'll have a video talking about it as soon as I can. To stay up to date with Falling Frontier, don't forget to add it to your wishlist on Steam. It's always super helpful for indie developers especially, since it increases the visibility of their games, and it's a great way to stay on top of development updates as well. Don't hesitate to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and want more Falling Frontier on the channel, and apart from that, feel free to subscribe to the channel for more news too. Apart from Falling Frontier, I cover tactical and strategy games through guides, previews, reviews, and more. Otherwise, for more information about Falling Frontier's greater campaign mechanics, you might want to check out the video linked on screen right now, and as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly, and of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.